Hello. In this video, I'm going to go through section 11.1. And as you can see from my figure here, we're going to talk about some of the different parts of a circle. And I'm briefly just going to go through some of the notation things so that you can look at your circle and identify the different parts. All of the definitions for the words that I'm going to talk about are in your textbook, so you should definitely take a look at that. Most of them are on page 746. All right. I'm not going to write out the definitions in this video here. So again, please refer to your book for the actual definitions. Like I said, I'm just going to go through the notations so that you can answer your questions properly to show me that you understand what you're looking at. All right. This circle here has lots of different things going on. And again, sometimes your diagrams may have all of these pieces. Sometimes they might just have a couple. So it's always going to depend on the figure. And same thing with the notation. And we've talked about this before. A lot of times how you answer will depend upon, what kind of letters or symbols and things you have in the diagram that you're working with. All right. So I'll show you a couple different things that may show up. The first thing I want to talk about is how we name a circle. So we spend a lot of time talking about triangles, and when we talk about a triangle, you see the little figure of a triangle and you would call it triangle ABC. All right, so how does that work when we're looking at a circle? Well, in a circle, the most important part probably is what we refer to as the center. Okay, so if I want to name a circle, or so we can talk about it, or I can direct you to a figure, you're going to name it just by the single letter that you see in the center. All right. And most of the time you'll see a little tiny picture of a circle as a notation in front of that capital letter. So in this figure here, we have A in the center. So if I were to ask you to name the circle, typically you will see a little tiny circle and then followed by the letter A. Sometimes, again, depending upon, there might be a little dot right in the middle of your circle as well. So this would be called circle A. Okay. So if I had a whole bunch of circles on my page and I said, hey, find circle X, you would look for the circle that has X in the center. Okay, so our circle, circle A. All you need is one letter. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is the radius. You've probably heard that word before. Radii is plural. Okay, so if you see that, that's what that means. And a radius is going to be a segment. Okay. And it's always going to start in the center of the circle, and it's going to end on the right on the circle. Okay, so a radius is a segment. So if you think about our segment notation, we're going to be using that. And the radius has to start from the center as one endpoint, and then it goes right to the edge of the circle there as the other endpoint. Okay, so again, a segment has two ends. So if I asked you to name the radius or a radius of this circle, you could say it's going to go from A to E. So we could say a radius is segment AE. All right. This particular circle happens to have more than one radius. Okay. So again, if you look at the picture, do you see anything else that goes from the center to the edge of the circle? So if I go back to my center, and if I went from A to D, that would also be a radius in this figure. Okay. So I'm going to add that one as well. Again, it's a segment. You can see I have the little segment notation over it. So again, starts at A, goes to D. All right. And in this circle, I actually have one more. So if I take a look, again, here's my center A, and I can see that I can go from A to I, lands right on the circle. That would be an additional radius. Okay. So this particular figure has 3 radii. All right. Sometimes you might just see one, sometimes you see 2. Sometimes they might not have any drawn. So again, it always just depends on the figure. Okay, so radius always goes from the center to the edge. All right, diameter is the next one on my list. All right, a diameter is also a segment. The diameter must go through the center of the circle. And basically it's going to kind of go all the way across the circle from one side to the other. And again, it must go through the center. All right. So looking at our circle that we have here, if I start over here at I, I'm going to go right through A, keep on going, and I get over here to D. Okay, so that segment that goes from I all the way over to D would be our diameter of the circle. And again, so if it's a segment, I could say it is ID, and you put your segment bar notation over the top. All right. You'll remember that to name a segment, I only need 2 letters. So yes, I did have to go through the center, which was A, but when I named the segment, I did not have to write IAD, okay? I'm starting at I, I'm ending at D, okay? But you must go through the center. All right. Next on the list is a chord. A chord is also a segment. All right. However, a chord does not have to go through the center like the diameter does. Okay. So a chord is a segment and it'll have both its ends on the circle. Okay. Does not necessarily have to go through the center though. So for example, if we look at our figure here, we have H right on the circle here. And if I follow this segment across, we end over here at F, which is also right on the circle. That would be an example of a chord. All right. It's a segment, both endpoints on the circle. All right. So in our figure here, an example of a chord would be HF. Again, little segment bar over the top. All right. Secant. All right, this time a secant is a line. Okay, so again, going back to things we've talked about before, a segment has 2 ends. Okay, so again, it stops right here and it stops right there. Notation, we just do the little bar. A line, again, remember, goes on forever. Okay, so a secant is going to be a line that goes right through the circle. Okay, so it's kind of going to go in one side and out the other. All right. So in our figure here, we have this line. You can see it's got the little arrows on it. It goes through the circle. All right, comes out the other side. Okay, so that would be what a secant looks like. Since a secant is a line, we are going to use the line notation. We do see that we have 2 capital letters here. My line goes through B and C, and again, but then it keeps on going. So we're going to say BC, and again, we're going to use our proper notation. We're going to put that little line with the arrows over to indicate again that it does keep on going. All right. Tangent. A tangent is also a line. It is going to look a little different than a secant though. A tangent is a line that just touches the circle at one point only. All right. So again, what's the difference between the tangent and the secant? The secant touched my circle at B, and then it kept on going through. It touched the circle at C, and then kind of exited the other side. A tangent is only going to touch the circle at one spot only. Okay, so if you look at this line that you see down here, it is a line. Again, goes on forever. It goes by, it brushes the circle, and again, it only touches right here at one spot. Okay, and that is what a tangent looks like. Okay. Now our tangent line here in this figure, and again, sometimes this might depend on the figure. Usually if I want to name a line similar to what we did for the secant, we'd choose those 2 points that the line went through here. If you look at my figure here where I have the tangent, you'll notice I only have 1 capital letter labeled in my figure. Okay, so I can't just call it line G. That's not correct notation. In the figure though, you do notice that I have this little L at the end. So sometimes you see those little letters and you can use that as your notation. So in this figure, if I wanted to name the tangent, since I have that little L there, I could just say little L. You do not need to write the arrows over the top if that's the notation that you are using in the figure. So tangent line L, that's what that means. Don't need anything else there. All right. Sometimes you may have 2 letters on there. You could always do that instead if that little letter isn't there. So again, it's kind of going to depend on your figure. All right. And then the last thing I have here is the point of tangency. So kind of explains what's going on. I just defined a tangent as a line that touches the circle at one point. Okay, so the point of tangency would be that exact spot where the tangent line touches the circle. So in our figure here, when I traced over my tangent line, you'll notice that my tangent line touched the circle right here at point G. So we would say the point of tangency is G. Again, to name a point, you just use that 1 capital letter. All right, and those would be the different terms. Again, those terms and definitions are on page 746. I would recommend you jot them down, but that's what they look like. Now again, your circles could have one of these, it could have all of these all mixed together. So again, it will just totally depend upon what happens to be in your particular figure. All right. And then just one last thing I want to mention quickly as far as measurements and the relationship, probably the most important relationship in the circle when we start talking about measures of segments would be when we refer to the radius and the diameter. Okay. So if, for example, I have my circle here and I'm just going to kind of measure this. Okay. I measured the radius and the radius was 5 centimeters. Okay. So now what that means, again, our radius goes from the center to the edge. In this particular circle, we actually had 3 different radii, but they're all going to be the same length. So if you look at my circle here, if we went from A to E, that was a radius, that's 5 centimeters. All right. If we look at our other radius that we labeled here, we have AD. Okay, if I went from the center to the edge, that is also going to be 5 centimeters still. Okay, and the last radius that we took a look at in this particular figure, we went from A to I, again, from the center to the edge of the circle, is also going to be 5 centimeters. So if you know one radius, you know them all because they will always be the same within that circle. Okay, and that just goes back to the definition of a circle. All right, so if I know the radius is 5, then what's the relationship between that and the diameter? Okay, and you can kind of tell if you look at the figure, I have all the numbers in there, but we said the radius goes from the center to the edge, and we said the diameter must go all the way across the circle right through the center. So again, if my radius is 5, the diameter goes all the way across, that means my diameter would have to be 10 centimeters. Okay, so again, you should be able to work back and forth between those two, knowing that relationship, thinking of, again, the radius only goes halfway across the circle. The diameter must go all the way across the circle. All right. Okay, that's all I got for you. Hopefully that will help you with your homework questions. Again, please refer to page 746 and 747 for your vocabulary, and there's also some examples there that will probably help you with your homework. All right, take care.